guys? So some of you may have saw my last video, the number 4 video in the Yamaha engine rebuild series, where I spun my bearing on my 2016 Yamaha R1. Well, as you can see, I'm on it right now, so I must have figured out a fix for it. Well, what you saw in that video was me at the very end starting it up, and what I didn't show you was all the problems that I ran into after that first engine startup. The bike immediately overheated. I turned it on and I watched it. I was super duper excited that the dang thing started. I had no idea if that thing was going to start or not, but man, I was excited that it started, right? So I'm jumping around like, who'd have thought it, because I'm happy as a, I don't know, I was super happy. And then I'm watching it, and there was, during the process of, taking the oil out and putting the oil out, there was a little bit of oil on the headers, and so it started smoking a little bit, so that worried me. And then, I figured out that was probably what it was, but then it started overheating, and I immediately shut it off once it got to 220 degrees, because I knew the fans should have kicked on at 205, and the fans kicked on, but it didn't help. So I called my buddy who was asleep, and actually I texted him, and he said, we went over it real quick. He's a mechanic by trade, and we went over it real quick, and he's like, yeah man, it sounds like your water pump. And I'm like, great. So I immediately got into the manual and went through all the process of, okay, how am I going to rebuild this water pump? And one of the things that it said, whenever you change your water cooler, your antifreeze or anything like that, you got to make sure that you bleed the system. And I was like, man, please tell me it can't be this easy. And essentially what was happening was my water pump was cavitating, so air had gotten in the system and it was just spinning around, and it wasn't pumping any water because it was spinning air, and the air inside the propeller of the water pump wouldn't let water in. So I bled the system, and sure enough, air came out and then water came out, and that solved the problem. It solved the overheating problem, which made me super duper happy. But then it got even worse from there. I just took the bike on a track day, and so I don't have my mirror, so I'm not a big fan of riding without mirrors. So my mirrors are missing. I still have to put my mirrors back on. So anyway, I took it out for a ride. My brother, I told my younger brother, I'm like, bro, my bike's back on the road, let's go riding. And he was like, cool. So we had decided to go on a nice long ride, because I knew I had 600 miles to break her in before I swapped out the oil. And as I rode it, I had ridden it a little bit before that just to test ride it, and there was a noticeable vibration at 4,800 RPMs and above, and it didn't necessarily seem like it was idling as smoothly as it used to, and certainly below 4,800 RPMs it wasn't running as smooth either, but above 4,800 RPMs it had an uncomfortable vibration. And that vibration remained there the higher the RPMs you went. So that was a little bit frustrating. So what I ended up doing was I built myself a manometer, which is this device that helps you balance the throttle bodies that are underneath the airbox. And so I balanced the throttle bodies every which way but Sunday. I probably tried to balance them damn things probably 20 times. Man, I even bought a new a used set of throttle bodies because everything I was doing wasn't fixing it. Why? I ended up checking the valve shims again and found there were 2 shims that were a little bit out of whack, out of spec, but in retrospect they were probably fine. And when I was putting one of the shims in, I dropped the shim in the head and I lost it in the head. And I think it fell at the time. I'm like, man, I bet that shim fell down into that hole. And I didn't know where that hole went. And so, man, that was stressful. And so I ended up having to drop the oil pan, which means take the exhaust off, do all that crap, dump the oil, and I sprayed some brake cleaner in that hole where I thought that the shim had fallen out, or had fallen into, and sure enough, 2 squirts and out popped the shim out of the bottom of the engine. I was like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. So I had to put the engine back together. At this point, I had already checked the timing, checked the cam shafts to make sure that the timing chain was on correctly, done a second valve job, or a second shim check job, checked all the spark plugs, moved the spark plugs around, trying to figure out why this thing was vibrating so bad. Ended up buying 2 additional coils, even though all my coils, all my spark plugs, everything ohmed out right. I checked the ohms on everything. Everything was within spec as far as ohm resistance goes. I ended up buying an actual throttle body tester and used that to test my throttle bodies, and my throttle bodies were balanced correctly. So I ended up finally, I had maxed out on my mechanical level, couldn't level up any higher. So I had to take it to somebody that knew more about engines than I did. So I took my bike to this place here in Sacramento called Daredevil Motorsports. The owner is an unbelievable dude. If you have any issues with your bike, man, he really goes above and beyond. If you're here in Sacramento and you need some work on your bike, that guy's, God, what a nice guy. Anyway, he was super duper busy, but he took time out of his busy schedule to ride my bike just around his shop, you know, and he said, hey man, it could possibly be this, but it really feels like something's going on with your engine. And I'm like, man, okay. So he gave me some suggestions, and he told me, you know, undo all of your, because sometimes when you torque down your engine bolts, you can get your engine kind of cockeyed. So there's a really specific way to torque down your engine bolts. So I did what he told me to do, which was get all the weight off the engine, get all the weight off the bike. So I lifted my bike up in my garage, I had it hanging, lifted the engine up, so there was really no weight on either the frame or the engine. I torqued it down, and that didn't resolve it. And he's like, look, if that doesn't resolve it, then it's worst case scenario, bro. And I said, all right. So that didn't resolve it. It was worst case scenario. So I sat there a few weeks ago. It was about 6 o'clock at night, and I'm like, man, do I really want to take this engine apart again? And I decided to go ahead and do that, and it took me 2.5 hours, and by that time I had that engine back on on my desk, and I started to take it apart. And I figured it could only be one of two things: the crankshaft or the titanium piston rod that was causing the imbalance. So I took everything out, took all my piston assemblies and my crankshaft to another fantastic dude in Napa that runs he builds race engines, and he has this super duper expensive crankshaft balancing machine. So I took it to him. He balanced out my crank, but what he ended up finding out was the crank that I had was, which I got off of eBay, and I know, don't hate me for it, I shouldn't have bought a crank off of eBay, but the reason why I did was, one, it was marked as a crankshaft for 2016 Yamaha R1, and the pictures showed that it was in impeccable condition. Now that I look back, you know, if I was a better mechanic, I would have been able to tell right then and there that they had it mismarked, because come to find out, it was a crankshaft for a 2016 Yamaha R1S, which is the difference between the Yamaha R1/R1M and the R1S is that the R1S has steel piston rods, not titanium piston rods, and they're about 30 grams heavier each. And so the counterbalancing weights on the crankshaft are about 30 grams heavier to offset the weight of the piston rods. And so that is what was causing my bike to vibrate as bad as it was. And I would have never fixed it. All the stuff that I was doing would have never fixed my bike, which was really, really frustrating. But my guy there, Tim, and I'll leave a link in the description to his machine shop. Fantastic dude. In the process, I met two unbelievable individuals. He ended up balancing out my crank. He had to make a whole bunch of phone calls and ended up talking to a specialist in Oregon, and he was the one that said, man, it sounds like your dude has the wrong crank. And that guy, in fact, said, man, F your client. Go tell him to get the right crank. And Tim was like, nah, man, I'm going to balance this out for him. And so he ended up balancing out, man, and I put it all back together, and she immediately felt like herself. I also had him hone out the cylinder walls, because this time I got new piston rings. I didn't need to get new piston rings the first time, but during that whole process I had checked the compression, and my compression was low, and so that wasn't acceptable to me. So I got new piston rings and had them hone out the cylinder walls. I also got a Graves 45 millimeter head gasket, which is a little bit smaller than the stock head gasket. And I just can't tell you, man, my bike is running so much better now. So smooth, so strong. God, she feels strong. I had taken, before this whole shit show happened, I had taken my bike, I think 4 times to Thunder Hill. And on that straightaway, you know, I could basically roll on max wrist, max roll on, and my bike felt strong, but it doesn't feel strong like this. We were at Button Willow, and I never once rolled it on full speed, all the way, 100%, because it just feels like the front tire just wants to come off, even in the high RPMs in third gear. And for me, for most of my last track day, I stayed pretty much in third gear because I really hadn't been on a bike in shit 7 months, you know. So it was like I was getting back in the water and learning how to swim again. And so I got some video of Button Willow. I'm gonna post that. And I also had a rear facing camera, and the video from Button Wheelers excuse me, it's kind of funny because man, my line sucked balls. Holy Toledo, my line sucked balls. And I spent a lot of time blocking better riders than me, and it's kind of funny. So I'm gonna post that video. I think you guys will get a kick out of that. And you know, it just shows that when you don't ride that much, your skill, your riding, not that I'm a super skilled motorcycle rider, I certainly am not. That is not what I am. But what skill you do have can deteriorate pretty quickly. So anyway, I wanted to explain that. I can't tell you how happy I am that my bike is back and she's running better than ever. And I for at least those of you that follow my channel, I thought that you certainly deserved an explanation. And now at least I'll be able to start making videos again. My computer had actually been overheating, and I had to get that fixed before I could make that last video. But I think I'm in full swing again, and for those that have, you know, sent some messages to me, you know, asking if I was okay and all that, yes, I'm certainly okay, and God bless you for caring. And guys, I'll see you again pretty quickly, okay? Have a blessed day.